This is From the Pro, conversations with the creators at the Proletariat. Here's Jim Bratton.
We're live at the Proletariat, sitting up on the little podium here where we're talking to Dan Jupiter. Dan Jupiter is in academia, but he's also a baker, an accomplished baker. So we've got some things coming up at the Pro. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Got a few questions I want to ask. I want to get to know sort of how this whole thing started. Let me start with this. When did you first develop an interest in baking?
I think as a kid, I was intrigued by baking. Licking the spoons after your mother makes the cookies.
Yeah.
At Passover, we had these crappy instant baked brownies, coffee cakes, chocolate cakes. They were terrible, but they were a lot of fun to make. I distinctly recall a Jewish bakery several blocks away from my parents' house that had these wonderful blueberry buns. And then a great place called Bagel World. What a great name, Bagel World. All
Bagel
bagels.
World?
Bagel World.
How many bagels can you,
There's lots of different kinds of bagels. And then finally a Montreal-style bagel bakery opened up a couple blocks away. That was as a kid. That was the interest as a child. As an adult, whole different story.
Yeah? Well, now, wait a minute. Interested as a kid because you felt like it could be done better than you are just...
It was just an intriguing thing. I think, now I would call it sort of the alchemy of bread baking. You throw this lump of inedible stuff in the oven and it comes out wonderful. That was intriguing, but it was just a different process somehow than cooking. Like soup is not interesting, but cookies and pies and cakes somehow are.
Was it texture? Was it the sweetness? Was it all of the above?
I think it's just, think of a cake. You put it in, there's no air in it.
Right.
It comes out of the oven and it's airy and spongy and wonderful.
So something happens.
Some magic happens in the oven.
Wow. An interesting approach on that.
I still feel that way.
That's incredible because your childhood's just a little bit behind you.
It's a little bit behind me, but there's an amazing thing of, again, if you take a raw bread dough, no one would eat that. I don't care what kind of bread it is, no one's going to eat that.
Right.
And then when it comes out of the oven, it's transformed into something amazing. But not only that, you can't even tell what it was previous. Whereas if you look at a soup, you can see the carrots and you can see the bits of chicken. Bread, where's the flour? It's gone.
It's a whole transition.
Yeah.
It camouflages the ingredients. You're leading me down a path that I never even thought about before. Did you ever work in a bakery then? As a child, you had an interest, okay?
So I had an interest. When I was a kid, there was a store in Toronto called Mary McLeod's Shortbread, owned, founded, run by Mary McLeod.
Mary McLeod.
I still maintain these are the best shortbread cookies in the world. When I was in high school, so I knew her from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I worked at her store. She'd expanded it to a restaurant. So I was waiting, bussing. I occasionally helped out in the back making the cookies. Things that I remember are the giant box convection ovens.
Yeah.
I want to get one if I could find one. The giant table where they made cookies. There's a divot in the table from rolling so much dough. And I think probably...
Is this like a wooden table?
A wooden table. Probably most importantly, the way that Mary interacted with her employees, with her customers, and most important, the product. So yeah, these cookies are expensive because you should see the 400 pounds of butter that we have in the walk-in fridge.
So
we're not cutting any corners.
How old were you when you worked there about?
I was probably 15, 16. I still wasn't really interested in the baking, but the interaction with people was an awakening.
Intriguing.
Yeah, and again, her respect for what she was doing.
And for the people that she both served and worked with?
Yeah. Now, sadly, she passed away in 2016, but the cookies, the recipes are in good hands with her family, and the legacy lives on.
So, where you worked as a kid?
Yep.
Still there? And it's in Toronto, you said?
It is in Toronto. I think the locations are slightly different, but this still hadn't really awoken the passion for baking that it's become now.
Which leads me to that. Okay, so you went to school, PhD in mathematics.
Yep.
And did you, I don't know how you had any time to pursue baking during that period at all.
I mean, there was a couple family recipes that I would do. My great-grandmother taught me an almond cookie recipe that I still make. That's one of the recipes I will never give away because it's a family secret.
Okay.
But no, I didn't. It was actually here in Galveston that I started. I was thinking about it today. I think I had maybe made those cookies or maybe made some biscuits, and someone asked what flour I used.
Right.
And then they mentioned this bread, Jim Leahy's No Knead bread, and I thought, that sounds cool, I'll give it a try. And then I kind of got into, someone else also gave me Peter Reinhardt's Bread Baker's Apprentice.
Yeah.
And I found Emily Bueller's Bread Science, and I started piddling about and making some cookies, making some biscuits, making pain à l'ancienne after work was very relaxing. But I think the pivotal moment came, a friend was moving out of town and we threw her a party, and I made bagels and I made a boule. Simple white bread ball with made a crosshatch pattern on the top. And I just remember the sort of shattering of the crispy crust as I cut into it with a serrated knife. And I think that was sort of, and that was the epiphany, and it's been uphill since then. I look back at those breads, except for that one, and they're terrible. But that was 8 years ago.
Well, whoever you served them to, I'm sure loved them, though.
People like the bagels, but there's a craftsmanship that wasn't there, but that's 7 years, 8 years of practicing.
This thing about sensory thing, when you slice into the bread with a serrated knife, I can feel that, I can see it, I can smell that as you're talking about it.
Yeah, you eat first with your eyes, and I think bread is one of those things where people, does anyone ever look at a soup and say, oh, that's a beautiful soup? That might be a lovely soup, but no one says that's a beautiful soup. But people look at bread and there's something there.
There's a visual aspect.
Yeah, in Peter Reinhardt's book that I just mentioned, he says, actually one of the first chapters is, what is it about bread?
This analogy, I mean, I love soup, okay, I love a well-made soup,
but
I don't look at that and go, wow, that looks like a well-made soup.
Right, but you look at a well-made baguette or croissant, and you do.
And you still have the smell and the taste as you would with other foods.
Yep.
As you got serious about this, did you find some peers here in Galveston that you would talk to, or are you basically on your own and grabbing it from published works on it then?
So, no one here that I sort of talk to. There are people who sell at farmers markets, though they're not local. I talk to people here about bread, but I tend to, just given what I've done, know more than many of the people I know. A lot of it is several books that got me started. I read bread books all the time. There are now a lot of blogs. For example, the Bread Baker's Apprentice, there's something called the BBA, Bread Baker's Apprentice Challenge, which is make every bread in the book. So if you are having trouble with Peter's Anadama bread or Peter's brioche, there's someone who's done it. That book is 25 years old. A lot of it is online, and then every book I read, I learn something. And you also gain a feel, I think, over time.
You have been a strong academic.
Well, I've been an academic.
Okay. And do you find, which do you find more helpful, reading or watching a YouTube video?
It very much depends on what you're talking about. So you cannot learn how to shape a baguette reading, even with pictures.
Okay.
You got to see someone do it, because it would be like learning how to knit from pictures. You can't imagine doing it.
Yeah.
It's not like putting together an IKEA table. But, I'm reading a book right now, and the interesting things that he's doing and the way that he constructs his recipes are better read than watched. Like, he's using different types of flour, so buckwheat, rye, and he's using them in each recipe in different places at different times with different timings, and that you can just see on a page.
So the written word can sometimes give you more depth than just visually seeing it.
Again, there's a sort of language in which bakers write recipes.
Really?
Yes. So the title of Ken Forkish's book, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, is not a lie. We talk about the flour content, then the water, then the salt, then the yeast. But if you look at these recipes, the ones that I'm thinking about, he also has what's called a pre-ferment, which is letting some of the dough rise beforehand.
Right.
Where he is putting the different flours, whether it's the pre-ferment or the actual dough, changes the recipe. Well, I'm not going to see that in a video.
No,
I might as well just read it linearly.
Get it.
on the
Yeah,
page.
I was going to say they did that linearity of the written word. It's not like a video where you have to keep pausing it to see exactly what they did.
Yes.
I mean, when I watch a tutorial, it's great, except I lose my place, and then I forget what they've done. Then I get it all out of order and everything.
And also, I need to see the recipe in its totality because I'm doing what would be called baker's math, which is calculating percentages of flours and water and fat and whatever else.
Okay, that said,
Yes.
I know you're going to learn to lean a little bit toward the math. Does the math come in very handy as you proportion everything?
Yes.
And is it overlooked by some people?
I think if I were to give you a beginning recipe, I would give you no math. But I think at some point you have to know it.
Right.
So here's a recipe, 175 2.5. That's a recipe. That is the flour, water, salt, yeast. Now, I haven't told you how to put it all together.
No, or the sequence.
Or the sequence. But for a baker, that sort of says, okay, that's a pretty high hydration yeast. It's a relatively standard amount of salt. It's a relatively standard amount of yeast. You're probably doing this pretty quickly. There's probably not an overnight aspect to this. Percentages matter. So
there's the precision.
it is precise, but there's also, I made just a couple weeks ago, 2 days in a row, several batches of baguettes, exactly the same recipes. They're completely different day to day. So you watch a baker, and I watched a YouTube video actually the other day of a baker. She worked with one of my hero bakers, now owns her own bakery. She was making baguette dough, and you look at her touch the dough, and they're like, okay, I'm going to throw in some water because it doesn't feel right. So she's precise about the recipe, but you have to listen to the dough as well. It's a living thing.
I recognize that, and wow, what a background. We've only got a few minutes. We only got a couple of minutes left, so let's talk about the Proletariat. We're here at the Proletariat, that, like I said, we're sitting on that raised platform where we can see the whole room, including the bar area. We won't go into the detail. However, coming up in the not too distant future, we're going to see some of your bread here at the Proletariat.
That is certainly our hope. Becky, our wonderful proprietor here, decided that bread might be a good addition. And rather than having to have employees slice bread, we talked about it, and I developed some recipes where we can have 3 mini loaves of bread in one tin. So you get a little loaf of beer bread, a little loaf of garlic olive oil bread, a little loaf of a semi-sweet bread with cheeses or butters or jams. That hopefully will be coming up in the next couple months. I'll have to be training staff here to do that.
Wow. This has been a very intriguing beginning. I'm going to ask one thing. I like to ask this as we start on the podcast, and that is, okay, suppose somebody is like you. They are intrigued by the whole baking process. There's a mystique to it. So what would they want to do if they want to pursue it as a hobby? What would be the first steps they would take?
A piece of advice, I was thinking about this the other day. What's the secret to baking? There is no secret.
Yeah.
I think what makes a good baker, and hopefully one day a great baker, if I can become that, is the same thing that makes a great bread. Time, patience, and the thing that Mary taught me, which is respect for your ingredients. If you want to start baking, I'll go back to something I said a little while ago. Actually, I just read a book. I shared this with you. A young woman in Britain very young woman, teenager, was dealing with depression. And she started baking, and that helped her with, of course, psychiatric help, get out of the depression. The first bread that she baked after she saw her father bake, it was one of the first breads that I baked, Jim Leahy's no-knead bread. Try it. It's remarkable. It is relatively simple. There's a slight tweak to the recipe I would suggest to make it easy. It's easy to do, and you get this beautiful rustic loaf that you might think would come from your local neighborhood bistro. I might start there.
Wow. And we'll put all this in the header on this podcast. This has been a delight.
Thank you.
We've just talked to Dan Jupiter about baking here at the Proletariat. There's more to come. More episodes of this podcast from the Pro right here at the Proletariat. Thank you, Dan, very much.
Thank you, Jim.
This has been From the Pro, conversations with the creators at the Proletariat. Theme percussion created and performed by Patrick Wheeler, mastered by Chris Criticos. From the Pro is a Jim Bratton production. I'm Sierra Sakel.